Welcome to episode 11, part 3 of the 755 Followed Me Home project. In part 2, we found a sleeve modifying the engine architecture. Evidently, the piston and rings did not get the memo. Since this engine has obviously been apart a few times, I'm going to check the piston to head clearance just in case I need to use this block again. Really, the joke is on me, because what I expected was the starter to be engaged, and that was what was causing it difficult to turn over the engine. But to bar this engine over is really tight, so I'm going to go ahead and set those two pistons so I can put our wire on them. The goal with this exercise is to measure the piston to head clearance before we spend any time or energy or money on seeing about re-sleeving number 3. So what I'm doing is just cutting some solder at 61 thousandths, and we'll compress that between the piston and the head and measure the thickness of it then, kind of like you'd use plastigauge. We just want to know what's going on inside there, especially where we see indication of the head and the pistons being in disagreement. It only takes a few moments. We'll put the head gasket back on, torque the head back down. Thing is, we don't know if anybody has planed the block or the head, so this will give us a insight into what has happened previously. I've arranged the wire so it will also check any valve clearance issues. $13 and $14. Now we're going to turn the engine over 360 degrees. That's one cylinder cleared. I can't get that one can't get her to roll. You couldn't see it on camera, but I came up against a stop, so we're going to go backwards. I'm assuming that we're getting some interference. That's what I wanted to know. There was one of them that went over. It might be the other one. And then we hit solid. I'm guessing that that is probably number 3. Let's take it apart, see what we find. Now we need to be pretty careful when you take this off, because some of those wires will stick to the head and some might stay with the pistons. So it comes straight up. What do we see? Looks like there might be stuck to the head, which is okay. And since we haven't rotated the engine since we performed the test, this piston, number 3, was up against the head, and it just wasn't going to clear with these particles on there. Should notice at this spot where parts of the head gasket have flaked into these water passages. Let's start with piston number 2, just piston to head clearance. I've got 25 thousandths. Now we go to piston head clearance on number 1. That's 25 thousandths. So we're pretty good there. We want a minimum of 23 thousandths, I think, head to piston, so we're good. So we're going to take the fuel pump and the fuel lines off, but the first thing we need to do is clip these twist ties, or these ties, clip these ties that are holding the crankcase heater, and they've got two 10mm bolts holding the pump. I'm guessing those are factory type. Take the flywheel adapter plate off, 13mm, catching the flywheel over by the starter. Now those too tight. Let's just see how they all are. Loose. When the engine was previously reinstalled, the bolts securing the driveshaft adapter to the flywheel weren't torqued evenly. Not very tight. This is a problem to find on a tractor with an unknown history. It's a little easier on the 755 to get that bolt back in there rather than the 855s. Nope, lost my socket. Of course it rolled across the floor. We got her back. Had my knee in the way. Front mounts are a 17mm nut and 16mm bolt head. With the radiator out of the way, these are the two easiest bolts to get to. Lock nut, but it doesn't have a flange on it. So the motor's ready to come out. You have to wonder what happened. We have a missing bolt there, we have a missing bolt there. This one I had to take out with a chisel. The pan has been plunged in here at the bottom like it's been set on the drain plug, and there's a welded patch right here. What I'm looking for is a reason for the crankshaft to turn very hard. There's a lot of resistance, except when number 3 gets up at top dead center, it kind of turns over, flips past. There was about 1.5 pints or so of water in the crankcase, water in the oil filter along with some sludge. I don't think we're going to see some bad stuff down here, but we're going to keep the camera going. Let's see what we can find. That gasket material is looking pretty good. Well, we'll just turn it over and see what pops up. There's where it breaks over. Gets a little easier. There it's stuck and popped over. Well, there's probably something going on right here with number 3. So I guess it's time to get that piston out and see what it looks like. We'll see what kind of bearings and bolts we have. Those are the new style bolts, I think. Okay, let's get the piston out. Huh. I'm looking around on this side. Of course, the rings are all stuck. Well, that's what happens to a piston when the sleeve lets go. Crack the skirt. So let's look at the block.
In this view, note how the block moves as the crank is turned. Rotation isn't smooth. It's squeaky, but doesn't make any sound. From this view of number 2 cylinder, it looks like there are 2 liners, one held behind the shelf deck and one inside that without anything to secure it. Here in number 3, my thought is that as the sleeve moved, it did so slowly until encountering the crank throws. Bad things started to happen when the top of the piston disintegrated, causing pieces of it getting caught between it and the head. If the sleeve had moved quickly, it would have broken off rather than bending and being worn away. This argument is supported by the presence of metal particles embedded in the rod and main bearings, and probably explains the considerable friction when turning. What do you think? Another surprise was found on top of the pistons. Ridges corresponding with valve seat recession areas in the head. Ridges stand 10/1000ths above the piston surface and appear over embossed lettering, in this case indicating 20/1000ths oversize. Also of note is the pitting of the piston outside the ridged areas. The consensus of 2 people I respect is that this pitting was caused by dirt getting into the engine from a loose hose or missing air cleaner element. Not that it matters now, but the rings were installed with the ends lined up in this area, not 120 degrees apart as specified in the 220 manual. The crankshaft may need to be turned, but that hasn't been decided at the time of this edit. Since the piston to head clearance is near the minimum, the possibility another sleeve will move, and the problem finding an identical 20/1000ths oversized piston, I decided to purchase a standard size block, and I had it sent to the machinist for machining. With work on the replacement block taking up to 3 weeks, this is a good time to turn our attention to the rest of the machine. Coming up in episode 12, we'll be installing the transmission and hydraulic lever linkage and bushings, attacking that hood repair, and painting the sheet metal. What are we going to do about an engine? I don't know. We'll see.